This is Closereads,
a philosophy podcast with Mark and Wes.
I'm Wes Alwan.
And I'm Mark Linsenmeyer. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is our first, you know about the Wayback Machine, Wes, right? What we've been doing on the public feed for the last year. Actually, well, since we launched it, to put forward the things that have been released over the last year in a much quicker release schedule.
Yes, and we've been lying to our audience, haven't we?
No, I've been very upfront with them that this is a thing from last April. This is a thing from last February, whatever. Well, now we are caught up. So you are with us, you people on the public feed, you people in the private feed. We're all together, and part of the change in that is so we can have on the public feed an extra commercial break. We're gonna have these intros where for the public versions, which we're going to do at least usually I think part 1 and 2 public, part 3 and beyond, if there is any more beyond, keep those behind the paywall. So that's patreon.com/closereadsphilosophy or through the Partially Examined Life Patreon, the upgrade on that. But yeah, we want to get more people. I don't know if I want to keep putting these. I'll definitely put this one, but I don't want to necessarily litter the Partially Examined Life Citizen feed with these indefinitely if they are not immediately relevant, if they're not like a part 3 to one of the discussions we've had on that podcast. So this might be one of the last things, but anybody, you Partially Examined Life citizens that are hearing this, just go to closereadsphilosophy.com. That is the evergreen podcast page for this podcast. And yes, there will be ads there, which you could bypass by signing up through Patreon. But if you just want to keep hearing the stuff and actually a little more of the stuff, right? Since even with this retrospective re-releasing, a lot of the part 2s were not on the supporter feed, but they were on the public feed. And I retroactively made the supporter feed on Patreon for those episodes public. So that's probably too much logistics. Tell us about.
Give us a follow, preferably on Apple Podcasts, and rating, and maybe even a review if you can do that. But it's easy to rate us without necessarily having to take the kind of time to give us a text review. Doing that makes us more visible on Apple. It allows other people to find us more easily if you do that.
Yes, even if you're just a supporter or you're hearing this through the PEL citizen feed, we would love you to go and just click those 5 stars if you have a functioning Apple Podcasts configuration on your technological links to the world. Tell us, Wes, about what we're reading.
This is an example of our incredible coherence we bring to this podcast. Yeah. Tell us about what?
What we're reading today.
We are reading the introduction to F.H. Bradley's Appearance and Reality. So Bradley is a British idealist philosopher, and I've wanted to look into this for a long time. We're much more familiar, at least I am, much more familiar with German idealism than English idealism. And but I think English idealism is actually quite important because it turns out to have had a big effect on the development of the analytic tradition, the Anglophile analytic philosophy tradition in England and the United States. And I think some of it is a reaction against idealism, but some of it against British idealism in particular, but some of it, with Quine, for instance, starts to look suspiciously close to rediscovering some of its British idealist roots, maybe.
So this was published originally in 1893. So, of course, Berkeley is a British idealist, but that is way long before. I normally heard these guys described as the British Hegelians specifically, which is Hegel really an idealist? He's not Fichte, but let's not let's not worry about that. I knew this also as somebody that Bertrand Russell in particular read a lot of, was influenced by, but then just rejected wholesale. Thinks that Hegelianism and everything that descended from it is a bunch of nonsense. And maybe the British, because they didn't have that particular scholarly tradition of, if you don't write an impenetrable thicket, then you're not a serious academic. That they feel like they have to actually be clear. And so if there is something that doesn't actually make sense in the
clear
theory,
to the point of boredom.
Yeah,
so
yes,
that's the other danger.
I remember
confusion on one side and boredom on the other. And
I remember when we read and talked to John Searle, that he said that he had a copy of this book, Appearance and Reality, that he had marked up like crazy, and he realized that was a complete waste of his time, that he just wholesale rejected these folks. And I think that might be sort of a standard thing, that when the elderly philosophers of today were coming up, then this thing from the very late 19th, early 20th century was still on the market, was on the plate. And now I don't even know if a lot of people read Russell, but definitely in school I read Russell and Meinong and Frege, but did not read any of this guy. And he was never brought up except insofar as Russell might have said something nasty about him.
I think Russell was originally into him, though, wasn't he? Russell was originally a kind of British idealist.
Yes. So it was his turner out.
Yeah.
Sometime in his philosophy. I'm sure we'll read some of him. But we were talking about having this book on, I don't remember if it was after the Malebranche episode. It was sometime in the last 3 years. You had raised Bradley and like, oh, this is at the top of our list. We're definitely going to do him. And then he kept just getting pushed off and off and off. So this is going to be one of those episodes where we are investigating, by doing this on Closereads, we're going to determine, do we like this guy enough to have him on to do this book or something else by him on PEL.
It's an appetizer.
All right, let's get to the actual text. Would you like to read the introduction, the link we have sent to you, folks? We put in the show notes. It's on the archive.org site, and it is PDF page 29, actual page 1.
All right. Introduction. The writer on metaphysics has a great deal against him. Engaged on a subject which more than others demands peace of spirit, even before he enters on the controversies of his own field, he finds himself involved in a sort of warfare. I'm liking this already. He is confronted by prejudices hostile to his study, and he is tempted to lean upon those prejudices, within him and around him, which seem contrary to the first. It is on the preconceptions adverse to metaphysics in general that I'm going to make some remarks by way of introduction. We may agree, perhaps, to understand by metaphysics an attempt to know reality as against mere appearance, or the study of first principles or ultimate truths, or again the effort to comprehend the universe, and not simply piecemeal or by fragments, but somehow as a whole. Any such pursuit will encounter a number of objections. It will have to hear that the knowledge which it desires to obtain is impossible altogether, or, if possible in some degree, is yet practically useless, or that at all events we can want nothing beyond the old philosophies. And I will say a few words on these arguments in their order.
So we don't know yet whether he's going to be defending common sense, like our current author, Thomas Reid, on Partially Examined Life, or whether he just takes it for granted that, we're going to come up, if we actually look at these things, we're going to come up with some surprising things that fly in the face of common sense. And of course, it looks like the point he's going to start with is Kant's objection. We can't actually do metaphysics. Metaphysics is beyond, all we ever encounter is appearance, reality. What metaphysics would be about is something forever hidden from us.
Yeah, it's an interesting beginning to talk about metaphysics in terms of the distinction between reality and appearance. I'm trying to think back to our Aristotle metaphysics episode on the partially examined life. Aristotle sees it as the study of being qua being. So I'm not sure that Aristotle, when he approaches metaphysics, understands it in this same way as having to do with appearance versus reality.
Right. Thomas
By
Reid.
the time we've gone through the early modern tradition, of course, it has become very much about that. But go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Thomas Reid analyzes that historically by saying, yeah, the ancients, they just zipped right to the reality. They just didn't dwell on what the appearances are, and it actually was a big discovery, an analytical leap through Descartes and Berkeley and Hume to say what actually is what's just the appearance, that our mind goes so quickly to the thing that the appearance, the way Reid puts it, is it represents, it imitates, not imitates, it indicates. Our mind just goes from the thing that supposedly caused the appearance, from the appearance itself. That's very hard for us to just think, like, I perceive a shape, but what am I actually what's my visual field that gives me the idea of that shape? Only painters actually zoom back far enough to look at what do appearances look like, and not just reality.
Right.
All right, so he's going to start on the Kantian objection, I guess. So A, the man who is ready to prove that metaphysical knowledge is wholly impossible has no right here to any answer. He must be referred for conviction to the body of this treatise, and he can hardly refuse to go there, since he himself has, perhaps unknowingly, entered the arena. He is a brother metaphysician with a rival theory of first principles, and this is so plain that I must excuse myself from dwelling on the point. To say the reality is such that our knowledge cannot reach it is a claim to no reality. To urge that our knowledge is a kind which must fail to transcend appearance itself implies that transcendence. For if we had no idea of a beyond, we should assuredly not know how to talk about failure or success. And the test by which we distinguish them must obviously be some acquaintance with the nature of the goal. Nay, the would-be skeptic who presses on us the contradictions of our thoughts himself asserts dogmatically, for these contradictions might be ultimate and absolute truth if the nature of the reality were not known to be otherwise. But this introduction is not the place to discuss a class of objections which are themselves, however unwillingly, metaphysical views, which a little acquaintance with the subject commonly serves to dispel. So far as is necessary, they will be dealt with in their proper place, and I will therefore pass on to the second main argument against metaphysics.
Yeah, so very interesting. I think this is what I've gotten from G.E. Moore and Reid and Wittgenstein and others about the limits of skepticism, or the self-limiting nature of skepticism, is an appreciation of the kinds of assumptions that go into skepticism, and they are robust, and one might even call them metaphysical assumptions, so that skeptic can't simply claim to be completely non-metaphysical. I think he might be on that track here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so it's doubting the doubt, right? That's the way we put it with Hegel and, I guess, Fichte. Maybe back that far. But to the extent, do we think that Kant, in saying that there is a thing in itself that is the somehow the source of all the appearances, but that we can't know beyond the appearances, is that itself, do you agree with Bradley that itself is a positive metaphysical claim? I mean, I guess Kant says there are transcendental structures, like he's sort of allowing himself to do a little bit of metaphysics, that is, say, okay, it is a metaphysical claim, but it is so indistinct. It is a merely negative one, and that is quite different and would require a different level of proof than a positive claim like Schopenhauer's, that Oh yeah, actually we know because the appearances are spatial and numerical and in time and things. We know the thing themselves can't be that. Like that seems like a very positive metaphysical statement, whereas Kant's merely negative one. I'm not sure that I
Yeah,
buy Bradley's argument here.
well, these Kantian claims about consciousness are supposed to be insulated a bit from skepticism, right? Because they're just extensions of the Cartesian method. I'm just looking at my own experience and inferring grounds for the possibility of experience, including mental functions, mental faculties. I'm building up this scaffolding of how the mind works um, through analysis of the experience that's directly available to me. And so, on one point of view, that seems like a very kosher, non metaphysical activity. But I think the anti skeptic would point out that this whole point of view, Kant is operating on all these early modern assumptions about the relationship between subject and object, which are grounded, right, in recent discoveries in optics and scientific discoveries about the the way we interact with the world, the way light entering the eye and then becoming nerve signals, all of that stuff gives force to the early modern skeptical and idealist tendency. But if we're going to take that as data, if we're going to take that as reasons for skepticism, those things as reasons for skepticism, I think we have to admit that though there are some metaphysical assumptions involved, or at least we're making a lot of common sense assumptions about the world and how it works, including existence of an external reality, right? It doesn't make sense to say, well, I'm a Kantian because look at how the light, look at how light goes into the eye and then generates appearances that look nothing like things in themselves. Well, you've already assumed some contact with an external reality
Mm-hmm.
in that whole model, that whole scientific. So you can't just say, well, I'm going to assume in the beginning, I'm going to assume that I have enough contact with external reality to draw these big conclusions about subject object interaction and then find out that I can just jettison that. If you jettison it, you jettison the reason for skepticism in the first place. So I think there is an argument to be made, and I don't know if this is what Bradley is saying, but there is an argument to be made that skepticism rests on a lot of assumptions, which one I think could say imply certain metaphysical commitments.
Right. There is a difference between these current scientific discoveries have given me the idea that, oh, it's probably the case that the appearances are quite different than the reality, such that I don't even know what the reality is. Right? Berkeley uses this as, well, actually, if the appearances cause the reality, then actually the reality if the reality causes the appearances, then actually the reality must also be of a like type. So it must be, if they cause ideas in our head, the reality must be ideas. Goes beyond that, and I gave the Schopenhauer version of this, but to simply be motivated to posit, well, it's possible that there is a difference between appearances and reality. Therefore, and I'm inspired by that, as you said, by these particular scientific theories. Once you then say, well, I guess I just don't know the relation between the appearance and reality. I don't know. I think that it's not that I've made a positive argument that we cannot know the differences between appearance and reality based on, deductively deduced from this corpuscular theory, or, these various theories in optics and other perception. It's more like I was inspired by those discoveries to reach this point of view. But now that I am at this point of view, I really can pull the ladder up behind me and say, you know what? I actually don't even know if Newton and his fellows were correct in this, or insofar as they are definitely correct, because observation, then they must not be talking about reality. They must actually be talking about this world of appearance. That's Kant's move.
Yeah. Yeah, I've become over the years more sympathetic than the anti-skeptic. And
Yeah,
ironically,
I think I am too.
You
actually,
sound more
but
like the
I'm just
Kant at this point, which is
playing.
ironic. Yeah, I know.
All right, go ahead and read B.
All right. It would be idle to deny that this possesses great force. Metaphysical knowledge, it insists, may be possible theoretically, and even actual, if you please, to a certain degree. But for all that, it is practically no knowledge worth the name.
So the second objection was, you could have this, but it is useless, which I can't think offhand of any philosopher that. I mean, I guess it's more that thing like, oh, Hume, you think that there's no causality out there, but you're going to be, of course you use causal judgments all the time. So metaphysical knowledge is merely idle frittering by the rich.
Yeah. And this objection may be rested on various grounds. I will state some of these and will make the answers which appear to me to be sufficient. The first reason for refusing to enter on our field is an appeal to the confusion and barrenness which prevail there. The same problems, we hear it often, the same disputes, the same sheer failure. Why not abandon it and come out? I have this feeling every day. Is there nothing else more worth your labor?
Nope. Not much else to do.
Not really. To this I shall reply more fully soon. I mean, is there a new Simpsons episode out? Maybe that. No. To this,
I mean, we could be out helping people. You could be working on our personal relationships, but we multitask. We do some of these things.
Being healthy and fit, and anyway, to this I shall reply more fully soon. But will at present deny entirely that the problems have not altered. The assertion is about as true and about as false as would be a statement that human nature has not changed. And it seems indefensible when we consider that in history, metaphysics has not only been acted on by the general development, but also reacted. It
has also reacted. Yeah.
But it has also reacted. But apart from historical questions, which are here not in place, I'm inclined to take my stand on the admitted possibility. If the object is not possible, and the adventure suits us, what then? Others far better than ourselves who have wholly failed, so you say. Others far better than ourselves have wholly failed, so you say. But the man who succeeds is not apparently always the man of most merit, and even in philosophy's cold world, perhaps some fortunes go by favor. One never knows until one tries. I'll let you. This is vague so far, but
yeah. I thought this was going to be philosophy is useless, like the Hume example I gave, but this more seems to be it just doesn't make progress like science does. So this is I've heard Sam Harris say this, like, yeah, I don't want to dwell on these things. I want to actually learn positive, real things. So let me go talk to a bunch of scientists instead of getting more philosophers.
And then say a bunch of bullshit on a podcast, which doesn't reflect a deep engagement with the. Sorry, Sam. I know that's why you won't come on BEL. All right.
So yeah, do we know that the object of metaphysics is really impossible? I don't know. Let's just give it a try. I'm not sure I find that too. I don't think that would be convincing to Sam.
Yeah. I mean, I do ask myself this question all the time. Why have I wasted so much time on it, banging my head against this wall? It is completely fruitless. It's these questions are impossible. It requires so much labor, so much effort in thinking, and then what do you have to show for it in the end? There is something masochistic about philosophy.
Headbanging suits you, Wesley.
There you go. Yeah.
But to the question, if seriously I expect to succeed, I must of course answer no. I do not suppose, that is, that satisfactory knowledge is possible. How much we can ascertain about reality will be discussed in this book, but I may say at once that I expect a very partial satisfaction. I'm so bold as to believe that we have knowledge of the absolute, certain and real, though I'm sure that our comprehension is miserably incomplete.
Miserably
incomplete. But I dissent emphatically from the conclusion that because imperfect, it is worthless. and I must suggest to the objector that he should open his eyes and should consider human nature. Is it possible to abstain from thought about the universe? I do not mean merely that to everyone the whole body of things must come in the gross, whether consciously or unconsciously in a certain way. I mean that by various causes, even the average man is compelled to wonder and to reflect. To him, the world and his share in it is a natural object of thought and seems likely to remain one. And so, when poetry, art, and religion have ceased wholly to interest, or when they show no longer any tendency to struggle with ultimate problems and to come to an understanding with them, when the sense of mystery and enchantment no longer draws the mind to wander aimlessly and to love it knows not what, when, in short, twilight has no charm, then metaphysics will be worthless. For the question, as things are now, is not whether we are to reflect and ponder on ultimate truth, for perhaps most of us do that and are likely not to cease. The question is merely as to the way in which this should be done. And the claim of metaphysics is surely not unreasonable. Metaphysics takes its stand on this side of human nature, this desire to think about and comprehend reality, and it merely asserts that if the attempt is to be made, it should be done as thoroughly as our nature permits. There's no claim on its part to supersede other functions of the human mind, but it protests that if we are to think, we should sometimes try to think properly. And the opponent of metaphysics, it appears to me, is driven to a dilemma. He must either condemn all reflection on the essence of things, and if so, he breaks, or rather tries to break, with part of the highest side of human nature, or else he allows us to think, but not to think strictly. He permits, that is to say, the exercise of thought, so long as it is entangled with other functions of our being, but as soon as it attempts a pure development of its own, guided by the principles of its own distinctive working, he prohibits it forthwith. And this appears to be a paradox, since it seems equivalent to saying, you may satisfy your instinctive longing to reflect so long as you do it in a way which is unsatisfactory. If your character is such that in your thought, that in you thought is satiated by what does not and cannot pretend to be thought proper, that is quite legitimate. But if you are constituted otherwise, and if in you a more strict thinking is a want of your nature, then that is by all means to be crushed out. And speaking for myself, I must regard this as at once dogmatic and absurd.
So I'm totally on board with this. There's an essay that I've always wanted to write, and of course probably never will, but called "Everybody Wants to Be a Philosopher."
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I would start out with the kind of common contempt for philosophy as something useless and feckless, but then you find, if you observe human behavior, the philosophical instinct is quite alive and well, especially in the way people talk about politics and morality, right? People are constantly on that track. And then even in my experience I worked as a communications consultant as a government contractor in Washington, D.C. for a while, and just in endless client meetings, which were 90% useless, 90% people trying to figure out how this was a meaningful thing that they were doing. The philosophical impulse, even in these very ordinary client meetings, was alive and well. And that's why you get all these like management consultant books, like, Who Moved the Cheese and this and that. There's supposed to be something. I think there's a desire for people to connect even their corporate office jobs to something higher. So, and then if you look at someone like Sam Harris, right, contempt for philosophy, but he needs to write amateurish philosophy books. He insists on being a philosopher, being an amateur philosopher. What he really is doing and condemning it, philosophy, as being too in the weeds, he's just not engaged with the difficult literature on the subject, whether it's historical or whether it's contemporary. So everybody wants to be a philosopher. They say they hate philosophy. It just means they don't want to get into the weeds because it's hard.
I think that, to be charitable, the attitude might be what has been my attitude as stated on the podcast, toward politics is that politics seems so easy. The choices that we're actually presented with that actually would matter to me, like there's not going to be any deeper thinking that is going to get me to support Donald Trump. So why even bother? Now I've changed that over time, that I've learned a lot more about economics. I've learned a lot more about actually conservative political theory and philosophical theory, so that now I'm okay getting more into the weeds on this stuff. But in some ways, it's not really necessary to think about, even the way that a judge thinks about things, let alone the way a political philosopher and all their creation of terminology, perfect versus imperfect duties and things like that. Do you really need all that to not steal and cheat on your spouse and things like that? So I think Sam thinks like all I need to establish is that ethical relativism is incorrect. So even just imagining there are worse situations and there are better situations, and what exactly makes them, when we can all agree on this. So whether you want to say ultimately that it's a matter of human nature or shared intuition or something like this, all we need is just the data of that shared foundation to then argue that this politician is more mendacious and horrible than this politician, blah, blah, blah. But it's still, you'd have to go further when you want to talk about abortion or talk about capital punishment or things like that. But even that, like, it seems like when we have discussions like that, we're less focusing on philosophical theories and more on how to interpret the data, right? Does it matter, whether, well, I don't want to get us too off track here, but like for capital punishment, the fact that it doesn't actually deter, does that matter? Is it justified merely by the justice of the matter? Well, that seems obviously, eye for an eye, old fashioned thinking. We can throw away that as superstition and focus just on, so there's sort of a default utilitarianism, I guess. Mm-hmm. So you're saying that this kind of philosophizing to say, I just don't need to bring out the big guns and go into the weeds to justify some sort of basic utilitarianism. And that's all I need, because we're not in situations where I'm like, you're forced to, if you don't kill these 2 people, then I'm going to kill these 4 people. Like that doesn't generally come up. So we don't, it is merely parlor games to talk about the trolley problem and these kind of things that actual philosophers deal with. We can just rest assured with our basic moral truths that we don't need philosophy to garner for us.
Well, I think what people tend to do when they get into politics is they get into what the psychoanalyst Melanie Klein called the psychoanalyst Melanie Klein called the paranoid schizoid position, which is to say they split. And right, so the other side is bad and all wrong, and I'm on the good side. And at the very least, getting more serious about one's thinking, it's not a guaranteed way to get you beyond that. And it's not to say that the other side isn't wrong, right? I mean, I have, despite what I've said in the podcast over the years, I have my own feelings of contempt for Trump and Trump voters, frankly. Right. I have a side, and I'm
sure.
naturally on that side, and some of it comes down to ethical intuitions and character and just who I am and taste and aesthetics. And, but,
you have a sense of humor.
And there are people who may deserve condemnation. I'm not saying that they don't. So I'm not talking about open-mindedness to the point of, moral nihilism, but it's worth reflecting on the fact that none of us, right? We think half the country is deluded. They think we're deluded. We're in a very interesting epistemological position, very Cartesian position of, how do I know I'm on the right side? How do I know I'm not on the deluded side? So anyway, it helps to think getting more serious about philosophical thinking can at least get you out of that more black and white thinking to some extent. But anyway, I should probably read on here.
Yeah, go ahead, because we could go on this all day for sure.
Yeah.
I guess one
Um,
one thing I wanted to point out about that. So the beginning of the paragraph that we were just reading, uh, I'm so bold as to believe that we have a knowledge of the absolute, certain and real, though I'm sure that our comprehension is miserably incomplete. This does not sound very Hegelian from what I know about
mhm.
Hegel's philosophy of religion, that it seems like, no, at the end of history, we will have
Right.
a, it's the God knowing, it's the universe knowing itself. Like we'll actually have a quite a detailed. This sounds more like your Cartesian, or I don't know about Aquinas, but certainly a properly skeptical Cartesian. Like, well, I know that there has to be a God that is sort of defined in this way, uh, just by the ontological argument, or a cosmological, a deist would even have a lot. Like, I'm absolutely certain there must have been something at the beginning of this causal chain, and that it was God. But I don't know anything else about God. It seems there are lots of
Yeah.
views that
This
are
is the
compatible with what's said here.
right. Good point. This is the polite English version of idealism. You you don't grasp the absolute completely. You just sit down and you have tea with the absolute. Sorry.
All right, do it.
All right. But the reader perhaps may press me with a different objection. Admitting, he may say, that thought about reality is lawful, I still do not understand why, the results being what they are, you should judge it to be desirable. And I will try to answer this frankly. I certainly do not suppose that it would be good for everyone to study metaphysics, and I cannot express any opinion as to the number of persons who should do so. But I think it quite necessary, even on the view that this study can produce no positive results, that it should still be pursued. There is, so far as I can see, no other certain way of protecting ourselves against dogmatic superstition. All right, that's kind of the point I was trying to make about splitting.
Sure.
Our orthodox theology on the one side and our commonplace materialism on the other side, it is natural to take these as prominent instances, vanish like ghosts before the daylight of free skeptical inquiry. I do not mean, of course, to condemn wholly either of these beliefs, but I am sure that either, when taken seriously, is the mutilation of our nature.
Mm.
So either orthodox theology or materialism, we need something
Common
better.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, commonplace. Neither, as experience has amply shown, can now survive in the mind which has thought sincerely on first principles. And it seems desirable that there should be such a refuge for the man who burns to think consistently, and yet is too good to become a slave either to stupid fanaticism or dishonest sophistry. I'm really liking this. This is one reason why I think that metaphysics, even if it end in total skepticism, should be studied by a certain number of persons.
I was thinking, so the initial objection, like, okay, fine, maybe you could do metaphysics, maybe you could learn something, but should you? You're going to discover that it's Cthulhu at the bottom.
Mm.
You're gonna, or it's going to lead to nihilism. It's going to lead to a denial of God and moral rootlessness and uncertainty and, geez.
Wearing berets and hanging out in cafes, smoking and being kind of obnoxious.
Say, well, at least I have not mutilated my nature.
Very good. Um, this reminds me of, I've probably told this story on PEL before, but being a youngster coming to Ireland, from Ireland to the United States at the age of 9, and being this dogmatic atheist. And I had kind of been like vaguely religious, but not Catholic. But, um, and for some reason, I went through this little stint as an atheist and was trying to convince all the American kids that there was no God, and really going at it hard. And then my mom said something about Plato and materialism, some little puzzle, some little aporia or paradox. And a light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, huh, maybe it's not so simple as that. Um, and so that's an example of, I became far less closed-minded because of that, because of that moment. And then by the time and then at 14, I had like enrolled in college to study philosophy on the side while going to high school.
Whoa. Well, I feel like you were way more precocious than I was because it took me quite longer, maybe the beginning of college, before I was a dogmatic atheist. Although I was open to Eastern things, I was just open to that. It was not a matter of merely accepting traditional religious views or being an atheist. I thought surely reality must be weird, such that there's more things than that. And there was only when, but I sort of, was still underlyingly an atheist. And it was only when we started this podcast that, like, I don't know, at least for the first few years, I just felt, not that I would be a new atheist, evangelistic atheist, but like, if you're going to press me, like, of course there's no God, of course. Mm-hmm. And I still feel that way, but I don't feel it's as politically useful to defend that point. And there's so many, other in between views that are just really interesting. I just don't think that this is another case of feeling like, well, you don't actually need to pull out the big guns to show that there is no God of the Christian sort. This is why Sam Harris is the new atheist that he is. Like, yeah, those traditional views taken very literally are pretty crazy sounding, and believing that there really is a virgin birth and all that stuff. So you don't need to bring out the big philosophical guns to refute such things. It's only then when you get into Ricoeur and other Levinas and these other advanced, really smart theists that you might see, oh, well, maybe there's a point, maybe this is all symbolic. Maybe there's a point in being religious in some more abstract way. Even Lawrence Ware, that we had on for our Jesus episode, has told me subsequently he's a pastor and that he probably does not actually believe in God.
And he told you that in confidence.
So. No. He said that on the air. or maybe I'm misquoting. I don't want to put things in his mouth, but certainly that he's a philosopher first, and that one can still find religion really useful and consider oneself a religious, not just spiritual, but an actually religious person with an affinity to one of the traditional faiths without taking things literally. And yeah. And that should be the path, perhaps, that at least you have enough. I don't know. Faith is the thing that lets you confront the absurd. I mean, we haven't talked about Camus for a long, long time, but I feel like taking the absurd seriously, that we're all going to die. All of our action is for what? For our own amusement? Well, that seems kind of stupid. But like, what else is there? I mean, you're helping other people, you're getting a legacy, but they're all going to die too. Like, what does it all add up to? And so Camus would definitely not say, well, faith is what you need to face that and keep going. But, other existentialists have added that word and said, if you're Sisyphus going up the hill with the rock every day and you want to keep a positive attitude, just the faith that there is a way to be positive about this, right? That in itself is a way of, that you could say, I'm living religiously. I'm infusing meaning into this apparently meaningless activity. That in itself is a form of religiosity.
I think it's your turn, right?
Yes. We're at the bottom of page 5 still.
And there is a further
reason which, with myself perhaps, has even more weight. A further reason for studying philosophy. Okay. All of us, I presume, more or less, are led beyond the region of ordinary facts. Some in one way and some in others. We seem to touch and have communion with what is beyond the visible world. In various manners, we find something higher, which both supports us and humbles, both chastens and transports us. And with certain persons, the intellectual effort to understand the universe, it's a principal way of thus experiencing the deity. I think he's saying exactly what I was saying, and I was sort of parroting William James.
Mm.
No one probably who has not felt this, however differently he might describe it, has ever cared much for metaphysics. And wherever it has been felt strongly, it has been its own justification. The man whose nature is such that by one path alone his chief desire will reach consummation will try to find it on that path, whatever it may be, whatever the world thinks of it. And if he does not, he is contemptible. Self-sacrifice is too often the great sacrifice of trade, the giving cheap what is worth nothing. To know what one wants and to scruple at no means that will get it may be a harder self-surrender. And this appears to be another reason for some persons pursuing the study of ultimate truth. I'm not sure I followed all that. You want
Well,
to get a part of it?
metaphysics for some of us it kind of fulfills our religious impulses to the extent that we have them, if we're not straightforwardly Christian or of some other denomination. I mean, this is true of me. This is where I get a lot of meaning, and in a way, it is a philosophy for me is a quasi religious activity that puts me in touch with what is mysterious about the world, and that's why I continue to bang my head up against that ball, because I want to be in contact with it, even if it involves banging my head against it.
You didn't correct me, so I probably read this correctly, but I, in my head, had the sentence at the top of page 6. He's just said, some people feel this connection, they call it religious. No one probably who has not felt this, however differently might describe it, has ever cared much for metaphysics. That's what it says. Right. Yeah. Okay. In my head, I say, no one who has felt this. In other words, if you already feel connected to God, you don't need metaphysics, right? You just keep pursuing the way that you have this simple faith that our activities are worth doing, and maybe you could romanticize it, and you don't feel the need to go read a bunch of metaphysics books which are sort of searching for something. You take it in a simpler, more direct way. So I'm not sure that just having the feeling of something higher necessitates that you then want to go through the trouble of reading metaphysical texts. But I guess he's not saying that. He's just saying that if you didn't have that, you definitely wouldn't want to bother to read metaphysical texts, right? If you were just incurious about everything, you felt that there is no sense of transcendence whatsoever, well, you might become a scientist. You might still be, want to dig into the depths. But ultimately, as I think he was saying before, people who dismiss philosophy as impractical, right? They're saying you can think, says Bradley, insofar as it actually connects up with other parts of your experience, right? Insofar as it's going to cash out in more money, more goods, more technology, more something, more happiness. But if it's just purely abstract thinking about the way the world is without a direct connection to a practical benefit, then why bother? And I guess he's saying that, if you think that you actually would be right, a pragmatist is gonna say you actually are getting some satisfaction from pure speculation if you think that this ennobles you somehow, right? If you think that this somehow is connected with a higher way of being, whether or not it's actually gonna give you a great revelation regarding that higher way of being.
I mean, it doesn't, we don't require I don't think we need to justify the study of philosophy with incredibly fancy arguments. It's enough that it's pleasurable, and that maybe it increases mental fitness. So I don't have to justify playing pickleball through some deep argument. It's good cardiovascularly, and it's fun, and that's it. But now someone might come along and say, well, it makes you prone to injury, and philosophy makes you prone to being weird. So you ought not to do it. And I think there's a point to that, but I think his argument also is important, which is that for some people, going to church is not their, and doing religion conventionally does not give them the experience they want with regards to the divine. And rather than forego that experience altogether, they can find it in this intellectual effort. And I think I'm one of those people. I think the fallback of that is like, as with any religious pursuit, it, it puts you in danger of being delusional in a way, which I'm not going to expound on here, but um, except to say that in the case of philosophy, right, at least religion has the benefit that you're going to church and being part of a community. And philosophy can be that way to some extent, but in the professionalized academic environment, it is often people writing papers by themselves and they're communicating remotely in a way. I think there's a more isolating quality to intellectual pursuits that is a big drawback to the religious impulse, which may be motivating them, at least in part. So when I say, yeah, philosophy can make you weird, and you go to the library and check out 100 books on metaphysics, and let oneself go and be disheveled and hunchbacked, carrying around all your books and caring nothing about this divine thing that you want to be in touch with. That, to me, is also a problem. So you have to do it in moderation. You have to say, yeah, I have this weird interest, quasi-religious impulse that I'm satisfying with this weird interest, but I do not want to be excessive about it, because then it could become bad for me.
Of course, now I'm thinking about all the ways in which that formula can be reversed. If you're Kierkegaard, then your form of religiosity is profoundly isolating. And in fact, he's arguing in Fear and Trembling that it is by necessity isolating, that everybody that is truly spiritual and not merely going to church is going to be listening to the beat of their own drummer, so to speak. And that's just the human condition. And of course, as far as philosophy goes, if you're in a faculty or say on a podcast or in a study group that you like the people you're doing it with and don't think that some of them are just idiots, that it's like, I feel very bad for people, as wonderful as I think it is to like, hey, we're going to have a philosophy study group in this city. Everybody meet at this time. You're going to get some cranks, right? If you do that.
Yeah, you always get cranks, and you have to figure out what to do about it. Yeah,
yeah. It's yeah. Any all are welcome organization is hard.
Well, if you said you're going to do civil engineering, come to our civil engineering study group. I don't think you're going to get any cranks. That's the difference. Philosophy, you're always going to get some cranks.
Hey, I think I saw that the
bridges aren't real.
The two towers could not have melted at this temperature. Yeah. The crank engineers, the only conspiracy run engineers.
Jet fuel can't melt steel. Yeah. Anyway.
All right. So I guess with the last paragraph, I will end this. Am I right, or are we on C?
I think it's me now. I think.
Oh, okay, right.
C. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead with C.
And that is why, lastly, existing philosophies cannot answer the purpose. For whether there is progress or not, at all events there is change, and the changed minds of each generation will require a difference in what has to satisfy their intellect. Hence, there seems as much reason for new philosophy as there is for new poetry. In each case, the fresh production is usually much inferior to something already in existence, and yet it answers a purpose if it appeals more personally to the reader. What is really worse may serve better to promote, in certain respects and in a certain generation, the exercise of our best functions. And that is why, so long as we alter, we shall always want and shall always have new metaphysics.
Well, this seems more of an argument for why it's okay that we're doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Are we adding anything to the vast? Are we saying anything that has never been said before? Well, no, but we're saying it to you listeners. We're saying it to each other. We're saying it to ourselves. And everybody has to go through that, or else, the dead writers just stay dead.
Mm-hmm.
I will end this introduction with a word of warning. I've been obliged to speak of philosophy as a satisfaction of what may be called the mystical side of our nature, a satisfaction which by certain persons cannot be as well procured otherwise. And I may have given the impression that I take the metaphysician to be initiated into something far, far higher than what the common herd possesses. Such a doctrine would rest on a most deplorable error, the superstition that the mere intellect is the highest side of our nature, and the false idea that in the intellectual world, work done on higher subjects is for that reason higher work. Certainly, the life of one man in comparison with that of another may be fuller of the divine, or again, may realize it with an intenser consciousness. But there is no calling or pursuit which is a private road to the deity. And assuredly, the way through speculation upon ultimate truths, though distinct and legitimate, is not superior to others. There is no sin, however prone to it the philosopher may be, which philosophy can justify so little as spiritual pride. Take that, Nietzsche, with your higher selves and your book for all and none. And
Yeah. I'm just looking forward at the chapter 1, primary and secondary qualities.
is that what it is?
Yeah, that's what it's called. You know me, I love some primary and secondary qualities. Can't get enough of that.
8. So that's only 8 pages. So actually, okay, let's do one more part on this, and we'll cover those 8 pages on primary and secondary qualities, because I feel like we've determined right now we like the style of this guy. We're not necessarily sure that we're coming from the same position regarding religion as him, for instance. That he may be more traditional, or I don't know, but he definitely has is not merely orthodox, and he's not going to be. He sees the point of philosophy. So, but at the same time, if we were covering this book on PEL, and we were reading 100 pages that included that, we would have spent like 2 minutes on that at best. Do you think? Because it was all kind of common sensey, and it didn't necessarily distinguish him or his philosophy. We don't have any sense of what his philosophy is yet, really.
Right. Yeah. So let's get a sense of that by reading chapter 1. Sure.
And then we'll probably put it aside in favor of, let's do this on PEL soon.
Yeah.
That this will be the 2-part warm up. I feel like with Merleau-Ponty, even though we had a 5-part warm up, there's still so much in that book that we could have episode after episode on it. We don't know yet with this one whether this is going to be tedious once we actually get into the weeds here. But it is 664 pages, says the PDF. So
yeah, the absolute is no shrimp.
And I don't think we're going to spend 8 episodes on this. So I guess we gotta read some syllabi. And so if folks listening to this have actually experienced this writer, this book, maybe if you're of the elder generation that had to do this, or just had a really, tell us about your strange professor that thought that this book was appropriate for you. Or maybe there's something else by Bradley. Maybe it was just thrown in to the analytic philosophy course, just like, shouldn't you know who's the chief antagonist that Russell is trying to grow out of? I could see this being assigned for that purpose. But I have faith that this will be interesting in itself and might give us some insight if we ultimately get into it on Hegelianism and all those weird things about Hegel that nobody understands. And we just say, well, it was an interesting exercise puzzling ourselves with that. Will we have a similar experience with this, or will the British simplification and clarification of these show that either transform us and we'll become actual Hegelians, or we'll follow Russell's example and say, yeah, this is kind of nonsense. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next
Thank
time.
you.